So we're recording, okay? So I'd love to introduce our panelists. First, I'd like to introduce Ms. Kim Joseph. Can you give us a little wave? Yes, she earned her undergraduate degree from Spelman College, specializing in political science. Her passion for public policy paved the way for diverse government roles in Atlanta, eventually propelling her to earn a degree in domestic policy from the School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton University. Upon completing her studies, Kimberly initiated her own nonprofit endeavor, Super 7 Girls. Over the past decade, her remarkable work has impacted hundreds of young women and girls, offering them access to curriculum in 7 critical areas designed to break the cycle of generational poverty. Kim generously dedicates her time volunteering with esteemed institutions such as the Chicago Food Depository, Princeton Mentor Collective, and Meals on Wheels. Kim contributes her expertise to the boards of Concordia Place and the Association of Black Princeton Alumni, reflecting her commitment to community engagement. Her active involvement extends to organizations such as Delta Sigma Theta, Chicago Women in Philanthropy, and the Junior League. Currently, Kim reads applications for her alma mater, Princeton University. Can we give her a small round of applause? All right, Veronica Hawad, I did it right? Yeah. Is the Deputy Dean of Admissions, Director for Access, Affordability, and Inclusion in the Undergraduate Admissions Office at the University of Chicago. She has spent the last 18 years working in college access and recruitment on behalf of both UChicago as well as her alma mater, Kenyon College. Veronica is a native Chicagoan and first-generation college student. She received her BA in International Studies from Kenyon College, a certificate in English as a second language, ESL, instruction from the School for International Training, SIT, and a master's, you have a lot of certifications, a master's in education with an emphasis in social cultural foundations from the Ohio State University. Let's give her a round of applause. And last but not least, Mr. Colin Lord. Anybody catch that? Dear Lord, Mr. Lord. Yes, we have some esteemed faculty here, just so you guys know. So this is one of my personal favorites. Okay, 17 years of admissions experience, 7,000 applications read and evaluated. Colin Lord is an enrollment management veteran with over 17 years of experience in various positions at every level of education. Most recently as the Director of Enrollment Management and Financial Aid at the Latin School of Chicago, where he helped reorganize and lead the admissions office. Prior to his tenure at Latin, Colin spent 8 years in the Office of Admissions at Choate Rosemary Hall, where he oversaw diversity recruitment and spent 2 years as the Director of International Recruitment. Colin also served in the admissions office of his alma mater, Binghamton University, and as an Associate Director of Admissions at Hamilton College. Mr. Lord founded the New Ivy Consultancy in 2015 and has conducted numerous presentations to hundreds of families across the US, Caribbean, South America, and China. Let's give Mr. Lord a round of applause.
All right, we're going to do a little bit of setting the stage for you. We already got our introductions out of the way. And if you didn't sign in, we can take that at the end as well. So there are cards. So after I kind of do this little setting the stage, I might just gently walk around, not in front of the camera, because that would be unfortunate for me, and just see if anybody wants to write down a question, also pens, it'll be very exciting, but very quietly with mouse feet so I don't interrupt. So what we're going to do tonight is just share some statistics to start wrapping our mind around the ever-changing world of college admissions. We're going to get perspective from our panel partners, and then we're going to to give opportunities for you all to have those questions, so we'll kind of look through those cards. We already have some preset questions, so anything that's not covered, we'll make sure those cards get to our panelists at the end as well. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Tony to take it from here.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. Thanks, everybody, for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it. It was a real group effort to organize this, so big shout to Ms. Kennedy as well. So we have an awesome panel, so we're not going to take up a ton of your time on the mic. We want to get out of the way, let the experts share their perspective. We want to kind of set the stage, as Kate mentioned, kind of setting some norms and setting a level of understanding for all of us in the room. Current landscape of higher ed is complicated. The three of us in the college counseling team did this decades ago. We won't get specific, but long enough that things have changed quite a bit. Things are always changing, things from year to year. Applicant pools are rising, admit rates are diving. This is something that panicked parents in this generation are telling us that they're hearing. It's not untrue. Since 2019, the Common Application, which is the primary mode of application for the majority of your students, has seen, member institutions have seen an average of 70 to 80% increase in number, sheer volume of applications across the board. Compared that to like 40% of non-Common App member schools. So the Common App is a big reason for the application driving upwards. There aren't any more seats available, right? So what does that do with more apps? It drives down the admit rate. Majors and match matter. You'll hear later in our Q&A in the application process how students identify themselves to the university can play a big role in the admission process. I'll give you a really close example. Ms. Kennedy's alma mater, our beloved U of I in our state. We are blessed to have 60% of our students admitted to U of I the last 2 years, which is great. Good number, ahead of the state average. Their admit rate for computer science is under 5%. So majors do matter. So how a student is identifying with the university plays a big role in how they arrive at that school. Earliest expectation, okay? Early deadlines are the new norm. November 1 is kind of, it's what we circle on our calendars as the date in college admissions. Over 90% of our 4,000 plus applications we processed this year for seniors. We lost the battery, but just shake it. All right. Yeah. Come on, baby. Yeah, all right. I can be loud too. I can put on my teacher voice. Find me out. 90% of our applications were processed prior to November 1. And that's very, 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 very common across our peer institutions, our peer high schools. Early decision is a term you'll hear tonight. We're going to ask one of our first questions about early decision and how that changes. How that changes the admission process and what that does to the landscape of admissions. Okay? Waiting out the wait list. All right? Wait lists are, as application boom happens and affects admissions offices, you're seeing schools utilize deferrals and wait lists more often and more readily. It's a tool that enrollment teams need to use in order to manage their incoming class. So students are waiting longer, sometimes into late spring or even into midsummer before decisions can be made. This is a reality in the current landscape, especially at higher, more selective, high application schools. The publics. So our top 20 to 25 most selective public schools have seen a boom in popularity the last 5 to 7 years. You'll see on a slide later with Ms. Curtin what we're talking about with the highly selective publics. Typically our highly selective publics are a nice alternative to students who are seeking a high academic space but don't want to necessarily commit to an early decision or a binding application. So schools like Michigan, schools like UVA, schools that are in that top tier, right, that are going to attract those high-level applicants are seeing big increases, 40 to 50% increases over the last 4 to 5 years at the top end of selectivity in the public universe. Okay, so some challenges and some outside factors influencing higher ed right now. These last couple years have been tumultuous. Veronica will tell you from the inside of an admission room, there is a lot of stress happening on enrollment managers and teams. I just visited Syracuse University last week, and you could feel the stress in their conversations of how we're going to handle some of the external factors pushing on higher ed right now. For those that aren't aware, the Supreme Court has inserted itself into the college admission world. No longer is racial identity a part of the admission process. Demographics are now removed from the review process. So schools are now scrambling. How do we still hold our commitment to diversity and representation without asking students what their background or representation looks like? So that's been a challenge. That's been a stressor on a lot of departments. Affordability and access barriers. If you have parent friends that are walking seniors through the process now, you know that the financial aid process in our country is a mess. Typically, students would have financial aid packages in their hand at the majority of universities, if not by now in February or at least early March. Most financial aid packages at most universities are not going to be available now until April. So now you're a middle-class family trying to make the best financial decision for your son or daughter, and with May 1st looming, which is the traditional enrollment deposit deadline, you don't know how much it's going to cost. Now, typically at highly selective schools, that price tag runs a little higher. So now we're looking at $85,000 and no financial aid package until the end of spring. So that's a real stressor on a lot of campuses. Some campuses are doing some really unique things to pre-package and use some of their early estimators to package students, but it's a real stressor on financial aid offices. Test optional uncertainty. One of the big myths out there is that COVID caused test option. The truth is, prior to 2019, there were 1,200 schools in the country already using some form of test optional or test flexible testing policy. Okay? What COVID truly did is it created a landscape where all schools, including the large publics, who were truly the last to go, into the test optional universe. Now, what did that do? What it unintentionally did is it created an explosion in applications, right? Just in our school, our average applications over the last 3 years have risen from 7 to 8, like 7.5 per student, to over 12.5 per student in our own building. And that's played out over every high school typically across the country. So with more students applying, with no scores, it puts a lot of stress on the admission officers across the country. The Common App ran some data last year. Roughly half of students that applied on the Common App nationally did not submit test scores. So what does that do for an admissions office that's relied on that metric? It changes the way they can review, right? So it really does put a lot of stress on the admission process. And then the international expansion. I printed this so I didn't get this stat incorrect. So post-COVID, travel restrictions have lightened up in the UK, especially in other countries. Since 2020, there's been an 87% increase in international applications to US schools. So what does that do now? It creates an even tighter funnel for domestic students. So these are some outside factors affecting the current landscape. Just kind of wanted to set the stage, and I'll turn it over to Kelly for some nuts and bolts.
Excellent, thanks Tony. So before we move on to our panel discussion, we just want to make sure that the room is on the same page in how we define selectivity. Now, defining selectivity can be open to interpretation, but for the purposes of our discussion today, this is how we're going to kind of be looking at selectivity. So, a college that's defined as most selective is typically a college that accepts 15% or less of the applications that they receive. In addition to colleges that you immediately think of, like UChicago, Vanderbilt, and Penn, this also includes colleges like Boston University, University of Southern California, and Notre Dame. The next level down are highly selective colleges who admit 30% or less of their applications, and that can include colleges like Villanova or Wake Forest, or even the University of Richmond. And then from there we look at very selective colleges, those who accept 50% or less of their applications, and that's like College of the Holy Cross or Lehigh University. And then we get down to moderately selective colleges who admit 60% or less, and that's like Fordham, Southern Methodist University, to name a few. And then, for the purpose of tonight's panel, we will be focusing on our most selective and highly selective admissions. And within that, we can dive a little bit deeper into breaking down the selectivity. So you'll see here, there are some colleges that accept 5% or less of the applications they receive. Just to give you an example of that, for the class of 2027, Columbia University received 57,000 applications, and they accepted around 2,200 with an acceptance rate of 3.9%. And then over here, there's also colleges that accept 10% or below. And another example is Duke received 49,476 applications for the class of 2027 and accepted 6.3% of them. And as Mr. Menestra mentioned earlier, it's just not private institutions that are getting more selective, it's public institutions as well. So for these public colleges, they are funded by their states. So their priority are their in-state residents, and so they have no obligation for out-of-state applicants. And so what this means is that we have a large number of out-of-state applicants who are vying for a smaller percentage of spots. And over here is a list of some public institutions whose acceptance rates are 20% or below. Colleges like UCLA and Cal are receiving over 100,000 applications for their incoming classes. And then there are a few other colleges that are hovering around the 20% acceptance rate, like the University of Georgia, Florida State, and the University of Wisconsin. So here we are, we just wanted to set the stage before the main event. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Kennedy and Mr. Menestra to lead the Q&A with our amazing panelists. Thank you.
All right, I just want to remind you all that Kate is walking around with note cards and pens. We will not take raised hands from you all. So if you have a question that pops up, that's the best way for you to do it. If we do take a question, it'll be from a little. So one of our students, potentially, okay? All right. We ready, guys? Okay. So, early decision versus regular decision. Can you share your perspective in applying early versus regular, as well as binding versus non-binding? This is a lot, this is multiple parts. What advantages and challenges do each of these options provide? We'll stay there, and then I'll read the next part. We'll start with you.
Okay, so let's say you find a college that you love, right? They're going to list somewhere on their website what their deadlines are and by what round. There could be multiple rounds. There could be early decision rounds. Early decision is meant for a student who has found the dream must go to school, right? By signing into what is a binding agreement, you, your counselor from school, and a parent or guardian sign a contract within the application saying, you are my favorite school. If you admit me, I promise to cancel all other applications that I've started. I'm not going to even look at other offers. I really only want to go to your school. Some schools will offer multiple rounds of that. They might have an ED1, ED2. There could be other types of non-binding early rounds. Many schools have something called early action. So you still apply early and find out early, but it's not binding. You have not signed a contract. It's a really great round when a school has it. Many schools will have their main regular round, a later date, a bigger pool, no rules, a little bit later notification, but it's when many students apply to that school. Some schools operate on what's a rolling platform. So they will give you a time frame and say the application is open and you submit and complete your application, and every 2 days or every 2 weeks or every month we roll out decisions as we get them. So one of the things you do have to figure out is once you've built the list of schools you like, which ones are you applying to when? That's a big part of this. At fairly selective institutions, there has been a growing preference for binding rounds, these early decision rounds, for a variety of reasons. Number one, it's very settling to a student and family to just know that we've locked it in. We have the one school that we love, we get in, it's over, we don't have to apply to any more schools, and you're going to the dream college that you wanted to go to. Colleges love binding rounds for a variety of reasons. The primary would be that there's no guessing game on our end about whether or not you will enroll at our institution. So this is, it's called yield, it's admissions math. For the amount of students I admit, which ones will choose me back as a college and which ones will go to one of the other great colleges on their list. I have no way of actually guessing that number if it's not a binding round. With binding round, I know it's pretty much 100%. With other rounds, we don't know. The student could come to us, they could come to other schools. Students, if you're the type of person that loves math and stats, there's a whole field of work in this. There's actually a very large agency that does this in the suburbs of Chicago. So if you like regressive stats and data and whatever, colleges lean on these people quite a bit. So colleges love it because they know you will come to them, and then you love it because you get your favorite school. But, although it sounds great on both ends, there are some things that could hold up a family from committing. So a student may really love a type of school if they found lots of types of schools they like, but by the time those deadlines come around, they can't just pick that one. They can't make that commitment yet. They want to look at offers. That makes total sense. For many families, finances can stop them applying to a school at early decision. I knew I wanted to go to Kenyon the minute I did my little fly-in. I went and I visited, and as a city girl, I was like, oh, look, stars, this is so nice. But we were looking for financial aid. We wanted to compare packages. It felt like the responsible thing to do, so I did not apply early decision to Kenyon, even though it's where I wanted to be. I had to look at offers. That would be the primary reason that most families don't dig into early decision. That doesn't mean you can't do a binding round if you want financial aid or if you need support. But that means that you're gonna have to go through an extra set of checks to see what kind of financial aid that school offers. If they're a selective institution, they may not offer merit. So do they not offer merit scholarships? Where do you fall in their pool? It does create extra work, but it can happen. It feels like more and more students are applying to schools early decision. That's great if a student knows that they have found what they want, the family has talked through finances, they've talked to their counselor, they've done the financial checks. Like, we've put everything away and we know that that's the dream school, that's fine. If not, you still want to be strategic. If they offer an early action round, it's non-binding, you still get your app in early, it's really great, you can still compare offers. If they offer rolling decision, treat it like an early app, get it in sooner rather than later so that they're not filling up spots in the class and you're just kind of wasting that time and waiting. Early, right, we already heard, most of the senior class is done applying by November, and that's not unusual if you want to make sure you're being strategic in a highly selective pool.
Ms. Joseph or Mr. Lord, do you have anything else you want to add?
Well, apparently I'm the historian here because I'm the oldest one, but I can provide some historical perspective. And I remember way back when dinosaurs were roaming the earth, when I started working in admissions in 1993, early decision was more the exception than the rule. And as Veronica said, it was those students who fell in love with the place and they got their whole room decorated with and they just knew that was the one. But unfortunately, context matters. And what we've seen, which Tony pointed out before, is this constant increase in applications led to an increase in the number of students applying early decision. And then some families were advised by their consultants that, you know, in order to improve their the possibility of getting accepted, early decision was the way to go. Because, and in some places that is definitely the case, because Veronica mentioned that you said admissions math, you know, and that yield piece, and that was indirectly due to U.S. News and World Report. Again, I remember when schools made decisions based on what was right for families and so on and so forth. U.S. News and World Report basically has the tail wagging the dog, and lots of institutions over the past couple of decades have been doing things differently in an attempt to maintain their leverage in that ranking, unfortunately.
That's great insight. That was good insight. That was really great insight.
There's one more question that I have that I'm off script, sorry. But people ask often, is binding really binding? What happens if you've been advised to apply early decision and then you just decide, I don't want to go there anymore? What is the consequence?
So no one can force you to go to a school, right? So in that respect, no, I can't force you to come to Chicago. But there are consequences for those who don't follow the laid out rules of binding early decision. We have a student in our pool who was admitted an early decision. Turns out he did not. We have you sign an agreement. You say, I will cancel my other applications. My spot is just your spot. We're done. Turns out he has other applications live and he's getting other offers. And so we've just wasted a spot. So we had to have a very hard conversation with him and his counselor today and say, you signed a contract, and if you don't want to go here, that's fine. You can go to another school. But because you agreed to this and now you broke it, we've rescinded the offer. The offer is no longer valid because you broke the agreement that we had together. Even if that doesn't happen, right? Even if they say, okay, sometimes we will evaluate the situation and say, well, what happened led us to take back your early decision offer. We will now reassess you in the regular decision pool, which is impossible to get into. Like a highly selective institution, some of their regular decision pools are very selective. So now it's like, well, you may not get that offer. In terms of finances, when a family kind of guesses their way into early decision, but they're not sure they can pay for it, and then they can't go. Well, so you really didn't get an offer of admission. Admission's not the point. Being able to cover the cost is the point. So you didn't really get the offer that you wanted. There can be a lot of game playing, and that's the worst way to do it on either end. You don't want colleges playing games. You don't want families playing games. You want things to work out as they should. So can I force you to go to a school? No. But are there consequences if you play that game and a college finds out or a set of colleges find out? If his other colleges found out that he was already committed to ED, they could rescind their offers because he's already bound to us. And then he's left with no offers. It's a very dangerous game to play. So I would just advise against going into ED, a binding round, unless you know for certain that that's what you want to do.
All right. So, is there an actual advantage to apply early decision?
Yes. So, as was stated before, I'll quickly reiterate, going back to that yield game, if you apply early decision, it's binding. So every student that you admit early decision, that goes towards your yield. So if you were to accept your entire incoming class early decision, you would have 100% yield. And that would be the highest in the country, obviously. And so schools keep that in mind, and they know that if you are admissible early decision at a highly selective institution, then chances are you're going to have choices in the regular application process. And so that is favorable for you. So ultimately, early decision, in most cases, will definitely enhance the chances of you getting in. Because we see this constant increase in applications, schools are struggling to maintain their goals for early decision. So a school might say, okay, we're going to accept 60% of our incoming class early decision. And they see a 20% increase in applications, and when they make their decisions and then do the assessment, they're like, oh, if we go out with these decisions, we would have accepted 80% of our class. You know, what do you do then? You've got 20% of the spaces left for thousands of students, and that makes it that much more competitive, especially when you don't know what the yield is going to be for those regular. Does that make sense? Okay.
I'll also just add that early rounds or binding rounds are advantageous in that there are higher percentages of admitted students, right? If I'm admitting 5% a year, it's not 5 across the board. So it might be 8 or 9% from the early rounds and maybe 1 or 2% from the regular rounds. So yes, a higher percentage are admitted. The college doesn't change who they're looking for. So I think some students think, well, my grades have been a little soft, or I didn't they think maybe they don't have the profile, and then they think their chances in an early decision round. The college is not changing who they're looking for academically or personally. They're just taking more of them in early or binding rounds.
Two things that you guys said that really stood out to me. One was the financial piece, right? I know that finances tend to be a sticky subject within families. We don't talk about it, we don't think about it until it becomes very real. And I've seen students have to walk away from their dream school because the family at the 9th hour said, I can't afford it. It was a pride thing. So that is very real that we have to think about. And then that piece of early decision, you have to know that you're married to that school. There is no divorce. That's where we're going. That's where everything is happening. Thank you guys for that. Demonstrated interest. So you know how you want to get all those emails in your email box for your kids? And do we track clicks? So does your institutions track demonstrated interest? If so, in what ways? And how does that impact your admissions decisions, if at all?
At Princeton, 100%. So when you go to college fairs, when you go on campus for walkthroughs, all of it is tracked. So they want to know you, they want to know you're interested, and so when you're calling, like I used to call John Templeton when I was applying, he knew me, he could pull up my file, he could see my degrees of engagement, he could see when I met with professors. So those moments do really matter. So when you're touching base, I would make sure that you're making meaningful touches, not just calling to say, hey, I like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, right? You're having meaningful touches, and you're going to classes, and they're starting to really understand your profile as a student. What are the things that are gonna attract you? What are the things that you do on campus? How are you gonna leverage resources? They're trying to build a cohort that makes sense, and one that is highly diverse, right? One that's gonna challenge your student, one that's excited about helping you engage on campus, do research, do a variety of things. So all of those moments help them understand what that cohort could potentially look like and how you're gonna be added into that space on campus.
The University of Chicago does not track demonstrated interest. So I am part of the team that reads applications from students who are studying at high schools in the city of Chicago to the University of Chicago. Because of proximity, we get to know our students really well. So we do know a lot of our local students, but that does not impact decision for us at all. So again, a little bit more about the nerd math, the admissions math. It's just so important at so many schools now. So most somewhat or highly selective schools do track demonstrated interest, and it does go back to that same yield piece of who they will enroll. I can't tell whether or not an individual student will accept my decision, but that data from past applicants can tell me what someone who looked like them on paper is likely to do. So the data may tell me that a student who they saw me when I visited their high school and they wrote in or they called in or we went to the college fair and I saw them and I scanned their thing. Like all those points of engagement might tell me that students who engaged in that manner in the past, you had a 60% chance they were gonna come to your school. Whereas the math from the past might tell me that a kid I've never heard from, never seen, I don't know his name, applies the day of the deadline as a stealth applicant. We don't know them at all. They don't answer they don't click on the emails, they do nothing. Tells me that I have a 10% chance of yielding them. So some schools will lean on this quite a bit because of that yield, that admissions math factor. And then many schools, I think the fit part is huge. I think for many schools, it's not just the yields and the math and the data and the rankings. That can be a part of enrollment. But I think also for schools that are very particular about who would fit, who would thrive, it's never gonna hurt them to then get to know a student more and have more reassurance that like, oh, this kid is meant to be here. They're really gonna be a great fit in and out of the classroom. So that can tell enrollment professionals quite a bit about fit as well.
Last thing I would add is, if you are very interested in an institution and you don't have the funds to visit, I strongly recommend you have that conversation with the institution, because I can assure you, in admissions committees, when applicants come up on screen and they're talking about the applicant and I say, Veronica, did they visit? And she tells me that they didn't, more times than not, an assumption is going to be made that the interest level wasn't high. So if whatever, if you plan a trip and then life happens, definitely make sure that you reach out to some record that you try to make the attempt to visit, because it can make a difference in the long run.
I'll also just add that most colleges post-pandemic have kept a lot of their virtual offerings, and that counts. They will keep track of who registered, who logged in, who was there. Like, that's part of it too. So if they're not going to bring you out for a visit and you can't get out there before you apply, take a look first if they have virtual offerings on their website.
And as someone who applied to multiple schools, from NYU to Columbia to Syracuse, I want to double click on what he said. Absolutely let them know that you're interested, because they still knew me even though I couldn't go to all those schools, and so it becomes really critical when they're thinking about how to build that cohort.
Thank you so much. So major choice. Will the major a student selects impact their chances of getting accepted? I think we all know the answer, but
From the experts, it means more.
So this will depend a lot by institution, because some schools admit by major or school and some don't. So for example, I've worked for 2 highly selective institutions, but they're both liberal arts colleges. The average liberal arts college is not admitting by major in that they don't have different requirements and assessments for different majors and different programs. I'm assessing your ability to get through the general curriculum at UChicago, and if you make a hard claim for a major and it looks like you cannot navigate that major, that would be concerning. But many schools don't admit by major. That's not the case at other types of universities. They may have separate colleges, separate majors, separate goals, separate assessments, and then admissions rates vary by those schools and majors and assessments. So this is gonna vary quite a bit by the type of school that you apply to. Your preferred major also has a big impact, right? We heard earlier, I talk with colleagues at the University of Illinois all the time. It's harder to get into the University of Illinois if you wanna study computer science than it is most schools in the country. So which majors are hot and which ones people are interested in, and which that can ebb and flow as well. In addition to, well, do you admit by major? But really, which are the majors that are the most popular, that are the hardest to get into, will make an impact.
Some of you are thinking right now, if I find out what the least competitive major is at a school, she said classics, not me. Let's say, just for sake of argument, let's say classics, and you decide that you're going to submit an application and you're going to put classics down as your preferred major. Then I get your application. It just so happens I'm a reader for University of Illinois. I forgot to mention that part. And you say that you want classics, but when I look at your application, everything screams engineering. You know, I consider myself an admissions Columbo. You know, and I solved the case, and schools, in general, I think schools try to stay away from students who are trying to backdoor into the institution, as the term we call it, because then everyone's going to be unhappy. Because if they enroll in the institution, and then they try to transfer into that program, and then they can't get in, no one's happy in that situation. So in those cases, the institution would just prefer to waive us or deny the student for lack of fit.
We'll let you keep it. Undecided. If a student does not know what major they want to major in, is that okay? How do these schools feel about an undecided major or application?
Well, when I see undecided student, I get kind of thrilled. It's kind of refreshing to see a teenager who doesn't know all the answers already. I'm the father of a 16-year-old, trust me, I understand. And so when students say that they're undecided, and again, when we have a saying, I'd rather you show me than tell me. If I look at your extracurriculars and I see a student that's a Renaissance person, they've tried lots of different things, academically, they're talking about, you know, intellectual curiosity and so on and so forth, then I'm all for it. But again, some students will use that in an attempt to backdoor their way into the institution. But for those students who are truly undecided, it is okay. For the students that are in here right now, I can assure you, most of your parents didn't know what they wanted to do either. And the ones who did, they changed their major after they got there. So it's okay.
Yeah, I also think that if, many schools will be very excited about students who are undecided. Like if you're still showing that you're working hard and you like learning, like they can still see a place for you, that's wonderful. I think this will also help shape the type of schools that you apply to. I don't believe that there's like one school for every person, but I do believe there's probably a type of school that would do well for a student. I wanted to study everything, so it wasn't that I was undecided, it was like I was multi-decided. I was like, I want to study this and this and this. So then I knew I should end up at a liberal arts college. I should go to a place where the curriculum's going to encourage me to take different classes, while I will have time to explore my options. I won't have to come in with a declared major already. Most of the most highly selective schools in the nation are liberal arts colleges. I know it's a scary term. That's just the way we learn in the US, like it's standard for us. So I would say also then, if that's who you are, get excited about the types of schools who are excited about that type of student.
All right.
So last last piece on the application process, any advice on the supplemental essay or how the student should address the supplemental essay? Kimmy first.
So I think it's really important to not reiterate what you've already said in your personal statement. So those supplemental pieces should be uniquely different and be additive to your application, right? And so thinking through, what are the pieces I haven't been able to disclose about myself that I think are really critical for the admissions teams to know about, so they can make a decision about all of me, not pieces of me. And so I think that's how we approach it. So reading for undergrad and grad school at Princeton and reading now, that's what we're thinking about. We're thinking about, how did this help me know you so I can make a well-rounded decision about whether or not you're gonna be a good fit, right? We wanna make sure that you're happy in the space, and so those supplemental pieces are really helpful for that piece.
Most colleges of the nation will want an applicant to write a general personal statement, personal essay. Not all ask for essays, but most have you write one general personal statement. And it is important in that you are picking something really central about who you are to tell to all of these colleges. They're really interested in the information there and the topic of your essay. They ask for it, so it's important. But for highly selective institutions, if they are asking for what's called a supplement, if they have additional writing, short answers, essays, they are often making decisions based on some of the fit they see in a supplement. I will see students work on that personal statement, like in the Common App, for months and months and months and months, and then oops, I have a week to write these very important essays for a selective school that has a supplement. So we want to think about that order. Your personal statement tells colleges about you as a person. These supplements tell you a lot about who might fit at a college. The school I used to work for, when we had a supplement, one of the questions was, tell us about a time you worked in partnership to achieve something you could have not done alone. So before you even answer the question, you're supposed to pause and say, well, what is the value that they are asking about? They're asking about community, partnership, collaboration. So clearly that's something that the school values. Number one, do I value it? And if so, that's a good school to have on your list. And if not, you shouldn't have it on the list. Then number two is like, well, now where's my show instead of tell? Where can I give them an example of how I too value this thing that they value and could show I'm a good fit? So most schools, I want you to just take a moment, like when you or your children are looking at the supplements, it's not just that, oh, I have this writing that's coming up. Just pause. What are they asking? What's the question behind the question? What's the value? Do I share it? Then I could be applying, and if not, I should not be applying. And now that I know that I share those values and I might be a good fit for that type of institution, now I can think about my answers. Now will I give them examples? I work at a place that probably has the most unique set of supplemental questions out there. The University of Chicago is known for asking very weird essay questions. They're fantastic. I encourage local students and families to just look at them. They're good exercises in thinking, even if you're never gonna apply, just to talk them over, like over dinner. And I gotta say, they make the job pretty easy on my end. So they are very open-ended, crazy, creative questions, because what we're testing for is not, it's not the answer. Where's Waldo is one of the questions. I don't care where Waldo is, it doesn't matter, the answer doesn't matter. I wanna see if you're comfortable trying to tackle a question that does not have a right or wrong answer. That's what I'm calling. I wanna see if you're creative, you can think outside the box, if you're comfortable in this gray zone. I'm testing for the things that will show me that you will be happy in the classroom, because that's how our faculty and students operate. So if you don't operate that way, I've had many very strong students apply to Chicago, and they're just such black and white thinkers, and I'm like, that's fantastic, you're super bright, we're a great school, I don't think we're a good match. So you really need to take the time to see, what is the school asking, what does it mean about what values they have as a community. If you share those, you would be happy there, and you should probably apply, and if not, you should pull back. I have some students who look at our essay questions and you could see them cringe, they're like, oh, I don't know how to do this. That should be your first sign, you should not be applying to Chicago. I have students who look at the questions and they're like, oh my God, I talked them over with my friends, we talked about 3 of them, we had different answers. Like when you get excited about them, that's a good answer. And I think that should guide that list building, even like the colleges on your list.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I think all of us in like the high school side look forward to when U Chicago comes out with their funky. What was the one year? Like, what's your pH balance or something?
They're fantastic.
They're awesome. Okay, great lead in. We're doing great on time, guys. The next section is gonna be kind of the nitty gritty, the application stuff. All of you are veteran's a fair word, right? Veteran? Yeah. Veteran application readers. Talk to us about course selection and rigor. Obviously, your application pools are filled with incredible students who have taken incredible curriculum. Can you talk about the nuances of what you might be looking for in a transcript, how you see it differently than just the GPA at the bottom right-hand corner? What are you seeing in a transcript?
So when I am looking at the full profile of a student, my baseline is that all of the students were taking academically rigorous classes, like that's what we know. So what I'm looking for is if that student was intellectually curious, right? Kind of weaving their way and telling me a tale with the classes that they were taking. And then how they are building that into their personal statement. So that I can see a degree of continuity in the process and their thinking and how they got to me. And so I'm looking at that transcript. I'm less interested in the GPA because everybody has a great GPA. I'm really looking for the storytelling behind that piece to understand how they will fit in at Princeton, right? I took classes at Princeton and NYU and it was the same. They're looking for the same thing. So it's less about, I think, that GPA piece because I know they're gonna have great GPA, but I'm really looking for the story behind the coursework.
Yeah, I'll agree with that completely, in that for most highly selective institutions, it's not a number-based thing. It's not, students will ask me about their GPA as a number, and I'm like, oh. It's really the story. And you can have two students from the very same school who have almost exactly the same GPA, totally different stories, where they place their rigor and which grades they got when, and where you could see they're excited and where they're not. But yet the number might be very similar in GPA. They might be near each other in the class. So I think it very much is a pattern. What are you seeing? And when the student has choice, what choices do they make? How do they rise to rigor? How do they, there's a lot there that's not represented in a GPA. I think for students who are hesitant about rigor, I always tell them, pursue rigor in the subjects you like. I mean, if you love math, go with rigor in math. If you like, go with that. But also know that there's gonna be a match eventually with what you've chosen to do, all the choices you made along the way during high school, and then the types of schools that you're applying to. So the schools, again, I've worked at liberal arts colleges that have really well-rounded curriculum. We expect students to be well-rounded because that's what they're gonna have to continue to do. So if a student hopes to never take a certain subject again, Chicago would not be ideal because we have 9 different areas that you have to take classes in before you move on to any potential major. Whereas there are other schools that have really open curriculum. There's a class you never want to take again, you don't have to, that's fine. Cart and horse here don't always work together. It's very much like, what are my goals and my choices and my interests, and then which colleges are excited about those choices back. Because there are schools that are excited about what you're excited about.
I'll quickly share with you an experience that I had over 20 years ago, and I still remember it like yesterday. We're in an admissions committee, and this application comes up on the screen. The young man did incredibly well. 12 or 14 APs, A+ grades across the board, close to perfect test scores. But he took French every year. And every year he got a solid C in French, and he kept on taking French, and he kept on getting beat up. And his senior year, he took AP French, he got beat up again. And my colleagues, we just lost it. We were like, we need to have him here, because that was an example of intellectual curiosity. He loved French. French didn't love him back, but he loved French. And he didn't care that it was messing up his perfect GPA. He kept on with it, God bless him. And he had unanimous accept from everyone. And so what I'm saying is, as you mentioned before, in liberal arts college, you're gonna have to take lots of different courses and lots of different disciplines. And this young man was obviously demonstrating that he's ready to go for it. And he also showed that, we constantly try to present ourselves as perfect. If you were perfect, then you wouldn't need to go to college. You'd open your own college. And so, I think that, I know that it's competitive, but we're still human beings. And I always encourage students, trust the process and present who you are.
Beautiful. I love it. I love it. What a resilient kid, too. He'll be able to handle whatever in the next steps.
I won't say it in French, but he'll be able to
do it. Okay, I was going to frame this next question a little more bluntly, but I'm going to address it on the edges a little bit. Test it, right? To some degree, it still is a part of the vernacular of how we review applicants at some schools, right? Of course, we know Dartmouth took a took all the media by storm, right? They're going back to it. Talk to me more about what changes in the review process when a score is removed from the metrics. How are we viewing that student? And within the context of a pool that may have 34, 35, and 36 ACTs, what happens to that pool of applicants when a score is removed for some?
Yes. So I want to focus again on the transcript, and we've talked about, like, there's this story, there's just a lot happening with the transcript. I think the average highly selective institution cares far more, even pre-push to test optional, cares far more about the transcript than the test scores. Because the transcript tells me your desire to push rigor, to take courses that are difficult, to rise to the challenge, to be prepared for my curriculum. That tells me a lot. And test scores, although they are important, especially in certain professions, only tell me certain things. So I do think that most highly selective institutions, even pre-test optional, now post when more schools are test optional, the focus is really still on the transcript. That being said, I think test optional is a fantastic thing. I hate that it's so difficult to navigate. And the worst is when you talk, like you go to an open house at a college and they're test optional and you ask them about whether or not you should submit testing, and they're like, if you feel your test represents your academic ability, like you don't get an answer. Should I or should I not submit that score? They don't give an answer, not because they're trying to be shady, but because it's very complicated. You can't just give me a number and me give you a yes or no. I don't have your transcript, I don't know what you want to study, I haven't seen your supplemental. There's a lot, it all goes together. So I would say that's one of the reasons they don't give the firm answer. There is a lot of guidance, and I don't think it's wrong, that when a school is test optional, a good way to decide whether or not you send in testing is to look at that school's average, like they will report an average test score or a middle 50 score, and you will say, oh, if I'm at or above that average, it's probably pretty safe to submit, and if I'm below, I probably shouldn't. I think that works for most schools. It does not work for highly selective institutions. So what happened when all of the highly selectives had to go test optional is that your bottom dropped out. So all of the kids who used to have lighter testing that were required to submit in your pool are gone. And so now only the kids that have the very most perfect testing are submitting. It produces a crazy high impossible average. And an average doesn't mean a minimum. So now if I report out what my averages are, it's totally false. I wouldn't want you to look at that and think only if you're at or above that level should you be submitting. I often think that the averages that are more relevant are within your community. So you can see averages from cities, from zip codes, from schools, from, like when people read my application and know where I come from and know how I've studied and know who I am, there could be some averages there that are relevant. I also think nationally, I tell my staff, there's competitive and there's competent. They're two different things. A highly selective score might make you very competitive, but there are lots of scores that show excellent competency in an area and they're still very exciting. It's very complicated. I want to reassure you that highly selective schools care more about your transcript than test scores. There are cases in which, yes, having test scores could be helpful, depending on what you want to study and where you want to go, and submitting high test scores is never going to hurt. That's always going to be one thing that's helpful. It won't necessarily take you out of contention at a highly selective institution to not have test scores, but whether or not you submit is a really nuanced conversation that your counselors are equipped to help you with, and when they see and have a question about the range, they turn to colleges, and we help them with that as well. It's a very good part of the process. It opened up selective schools to so many more kids who weren't thinking about them before, but it's so hard to navigate. So I would say these are one of the pieces that's very nuanced, and you have to lean on the people who are going to help you with the process.
What's the question again?
How does it change the way you view the applicant pool? I mean, there are students on both ends of the spectrum.
Exactly. So I was a sociology major in college, and one of the things I learned was, as a researcher, you always have to present put your biases up front for your reader. So I'm gonna share you mine. I came from a working class family. I was born in North London, England, grew up in Barbados. Rihanna went to my secondary school in Barbados. And I moved to New York when I was 16. I went to public school in New York City, and my mom pretty much grew up in England, so we had no way of navigating the college admission process. Interestingly enough, you might find it surprising, I didn't graduate top 5% of my class, but don't ever remember speaking to a college counselor. I remember I had a part-time job, and I worked at 2 a.m. the Friday before the SAT. I went in, I took the test cold. I couldn't afford a prep book. I definitely couldn't afford prep courses and so on and so forth. But I was gonna follow my peers, and so all the other AP kids were taking it again, so I signed up and to take it again. The day that we came in for the second testing, we were in a waiting room, and one of my peers said, "Isn't it great that they don't penalize you when you skip a question?" And I turned to her and said, "What? Are you sure?" And I kept on asking her that until we went into the rooms, and with that one piece of information, I increased my score by 140 points. So that's when I realized, what are we really testing here? My test taking technique improved, and that in turn enhanced my score. My point is that I definitely have my feelings about standardized testing because I see it as a barrier to a lot of capable kids who could be doing well in these institutions. There was one more thing I was going to say about testing. Oh, also keep in mind that some schools will look at the sub-scores. It's really important. So, for example, and as you would suspect, if you're applying for a STEM program and your math score, your quantitative score isn't very high, then obviously that's not ideal. So your overall score might be impressive, but you should also keep in account what your sub-scores are. If you're for STEM, the quantitative scores probably are weighted more. For the humanities, obviously your verbal, and everyone wants a high reading score because that's, in a lot of ways, reading comprehension is your silver bullet to success in college.
All right, third part of the application, nuts and bolts. Can we myth bust for a minute? Let's talk about that infamous section in the Common App, the activities section, okay? Depending on who you talk to, right, you have to have cured cancer, saved a drowning puppy, created a club, right? I mean, you have to be the captain of 5 sports, right? What's the reality behind building an image outside of your transcript? We've already established the transcript is the key, but what else are we bringing to the table, and what does that look like? Is it better to add 1,000 bullet points, or is it better to really express your interest or passion in a particular area? Can you talk a little bit about how to build that side of your application?
So I interview for Chicago and Rockford every year, 20 to 30 students who are interested in coming to Princeton. Princeton gives an interview to all students who apply. So to be really clear, you should look at Yale, for example, if you're interested, because their interviews are different. They're post a round of selection. Princeton does not do that. We're interviewing everybody who wants an interview. So I really encourage you to opt in because it is an additive component to the application. With that said, I'm meeting kids who do start NGOs at 12 and speak 10 languages and travel, no longer live at home because, they're doing really interesting stuff. But I will tell you, after doing these interviews for 10 to 15 years, that only one student I've interviewed has been waitlisted. All the others have been declined. I've interviewed a lot of kids that are amazing. And so what I want to see is not really that. I want to see what you're passionate about. So I'd like you to tell me one thing that you absolutely love instead of 12 things. Because at Princeton, that doesn't really move the needle, right? We're talking about kids that are really, really fantastic. They're all brilliant. They all make me walk out and say, what was I doing at 17, right? But I'm really excited when you're telling me what you're passionate about, and then I get to convey that to the team and say, listen, they're really excited about whale watching for A, B, and C reasons. That's really important to me than the 15 things that you think that we're gonna want to see on your application.
I think most colleges want quality, not just quantity. So it's not just a long list, it's that a list matters to you. I think that piece is really important. I think we should probably think beyond the parameters of what is listable. So within the Common Application, there's a section for like family responsibilities, and you don't even think to put it. But yes, if you pick up your younger siblings and babysit them and cook and clean and take care of your grandma, I mean, those are all things that you spend your time doing, and not everyone chooses to do those stuff. So I do think also thinking broadly about what you do with your time is important, and then accounting for that. So some of it is stuff that you do that you're involved with others, at school, at work, through church, through a service organization. That's all great. It could also be things that you do for your family. It could also be things that you just love on your own. You're like, I read, and every November I attempt to write a novel, and that's great too. I mean, you really have to dig to stop and think, how do I represent who I am, and how I spend my time. I think most residential colleges where you're gonna live at that college are trying to get a sense of, our students have to learn how to navigate their work, which is their school, and then what they do outside of the classroom, their other activities, the things that they like, their work. So part of it is, are you figuring out that balance of, here's what I do, my work is my school right now, and here's what else I do with my spare time, what I like, what I'm committed to, what I have to do. Are you figuring out that balance? Because now you're gonna be even more independent in college, and I wanna make sure that you know how to navigate those two worlds, and you're making sure you figure out how to balance them in the long term. I think that's a big part of it as well.
To the young people, I said it before, I'll say it again, trust the process. It's kind of like you're going on a date and you're not being your true self, and where's that going to go? It's going to be disastrous. And the same thing, I believe the same thing about college admissions. The folks that make the decisions at these institutions know what type of student works in that environment. So be yourself. I always tell students, when you're presenting all of the application, don't write what you think the admissions officer wants to hear, because guess what? Most people are doing that and they all sound the same. Be honest, be truthful, and focus on things that you're passionate about. And I can assure you, if you write about what you're passionate about, that passion will come through in the application. I always say your goal is to have Veronica running up and down in the hallway telling everyone in the admissions office about the essay that she just wrote, or about the activity that a student is doing that's so amazing. So try to focus on your passions.
Excellent. I'm going to hand it over to Miranda. We're going to talk about culture and institutional identity.
So, fun fact, I was also a first-generation student. I thought I was going to Purdue University just because I liked the Boilermakers at the time and I didn't know anything about college. And then I got my financial aid, and it was a $20,000 a year price tag that I couldn't afford. So I ended up going to U of I cold, never visiting a campus. I want to talk to you all about how you can determine from the application if the school is a good fit. We have a diverse body of students with a diverse interest, right? Each of your kids are different. And so just because it has the shiny name of Princeton or University of Chicago or Hamilton or U of I or the other 8,000 schools you read for, right? How do you know that the application you're reading is actually a good fit for the kiddo?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I mean, I think when I am looking at a student, I can tell if they're trying to make me believe that they want to be there versus that they are a really good fit for the school. I want to know if you're passionate about what we believe in at the school, how much have you dug into the work, the research, the campus, and so those are the things I'm asking you to speak to. So if you say to me, I want to work with CC Rouse because she's an economist and I really love at Princeton. Like, I know that you've taken some time to learn about us just like we're learning about you. 4 years is a long time to not like the school, to not like the place. And so working with the team at DePaul to think about, do I want to be in a city? Do I want to be in an urban environment? Like, these are sort of things that are really authentic to what is a fit for you. And so those things come through as we're reading that application. And so I'm thinking about, what are the tells in your application that let me know that you're going to be really excited about being here? And then if you are attending virtual, opportunities, that's also really helpful. They're tracking the questions that you're asking and then following up on those questions to help you understand if this is a good fit. We really, really, really want you to like it. We're thinking about retention, we're thinking about transfer rate, and so it's really important to us that you get it right? And that we're going to be able to provide the supports that are necessary for you to thrive on campus.
We spoke a little bit earlier about these supplemental essays and how colleges are giving you these really big clues about what they value as a community in them. I think that's definitely important. You should pay a lot of attention there. I think in terms of list building on behalf of a student and finding schools that might be a good fit for them, If you have the benefit of doing an on-campus visit, you want to do the admissions portion. You want to get that demonstrated interest in. You want to engage with them. You want to talk to them. But if you have time on that campus, talk to just students on that campus, not the tour guides who have been taught how to give their answers, which are still real answers, but they're polished answers. What you want to do is talk to a kid who's just sitting on the quad, just eating in the dining hall, waiting for a shuttle. Talk to them, and if they give you a similar response, just not polished, then you know, oh, this is real, like this is really who the student body is. I also would advise most colleges have their student newspapers online. College students think journalism equals complaining. Like every article, and they're all just like bashing. They're like, you would think nobody likes going to college ever if you read college newspapers. I love reading them. I read them for other schools. Read them, because then you could see there are things on every single college campus, including these amazing highly selective institutions, that students are not excited about. What are those things? And some of them are going to matter highly to you on like a personal level, and so you can hone in on them. And you won't see those articles come up in some colleges and others. And what does that student body care about? I think that's really, really, really enlightening. Read those student newspapers online. Go into it knowing that students on that campus are not miserable. You would think so if you read these newspapers. But you can really quickly tell, what is it that they complain about? What don't they like? What issues are they having with administration, leadership choices, small things on campus? They're so enlightening. And when you read several of them and compare and contrast, you get an instant sense of the student body and what they care about and what they don't. What they don't mention says a lot as well.
I want to talk a little bit about climate, and as readers and as admission professionals, how you build the climate of your schools, right? Who you're selecting, how do you choose the best students to represent your prospective institutions, right? The country is different, we're changing, the world is different and changing. So I know that we're attracting from everywhere. How do you find authenticity?
Okay. I will say I'm in a unique position again with UChicago. UChicago is very dedicated to who they are, and they have been for a very long time, and kind of unabashedly so. And that's good for some students and good for others who know that they don't want to be there, right? Sometimes a school will have a very firm take on who they are academically or personally. I want you to know that at most highly selective institutions, admissions officers don't decide who they want. They take the marching orders from others. What are the institutional priorities that should guide my work? And then I will do my job and find you who you said you wanted. So the university has a president, there's a provost who oversees the academic faculty, there are trustees, leaders of the college that make decisions, the alumni base. I mean, there are a lot of people who actually tell us, this is who we are, and this is who we want in our class. Way back before many colleges were going test optional, I was working for Kenyon, and Kenyon wanted to go test optional, and the faculty said no. Admissions didn't just get to decide, we're gonna be test optional. Leaders who engage with students and do things on that campus had to all agree that that was the thing they were or were not gonna do. So institutional priorities will shape an institution quite a bit. And again, some are very firm, historically who they are, historically who they've had a commitment to serving. It's a big piece of who they are, and for some colleges, it's more general. They're like, hey, we're gonna enroll our class and meet our revenue goals, and we're gonna do what we need to do. Some schools, it's very easy to tell what those institutional priorities are, and some it is not. But I do wanna at least let you know that it's not, I'm not searching for kids I like or kids I don't like. It's not usually a personal thing, and it's not even usually an admissions level thing. The universities and colleges have decided this is who we are, and this is who we want to serve and who we want on our campus. So admissions, please go forth and find me these students who we think will be a good fit. And then I think the admissions offices are in fact the ones who should be doing a good job of transmitting that to you. What is it that we value? Who is it that we're looking for, so that you could find yourself in the right pool?
So before I answer the question, I want to say two things before I forget the end. First of all, to the young people in the room, the idea, I'm married to my, my soul. Hi. And some people believe in that I don't think that's necessarily the case when it comes to picking a college university. I don't believe there's one perfect place for you, and if you don't get there, then all else will fail. As Veronica mentioned briefly before, there might be a type of school that might be the best fit for you, but in terms of one institution, don't put that type of stress on yourself through this process. And to the parents, I went through this process. I worked in enrollment management my entire professional career, and 4 years ago, my son applied to junior boarding school. And so for the first time in my life, I was on the other side of that process. So I'm gonna stand at the end and hug all the parents on the way out, because I had no idea how incredibly intense the process is for the parents. I want to say to the parents, regardless of the outcome of this process, this is not an indictment on you as a parent or the quality of your son or daughter. I can assure you that lots of people like Veronica are in the admissions committee, and if she had the space, she would take 200-300 more kids. She works in admissions. She wants to admit folks. Unfortunately, because of the reality landscape that we talked about before, there are not enough spaces for all the amazing students. And I want you to keep that in perspective when you go through this process. To go back to the original question, from a philosophical perspective, I think schools are looking for students that are open-minded. I know we live in a very bizarre time now, but colleges and universities used to be a place where people could go and debate and have difference of opinion and so on and so forth. I still think that that's the ideal and what colleges and universities are looking for. I think it's hard to have a vibrant academic space if you don't have students that have intellectual curiosity. Because when people love learning, it's just going to happen continuously, and it's going to be dynamic, and that's another thing that colleges and universities are looking for. And then, because they're going to be part of a community, they're looking for students that have empathy and compassion, have integrity. That's why those recommendations are so important, and those interviews and so on and so forth. When you have those type of characteristics in your students, you tend to have a pretty impressive community.
Surprisingly, we only have 5 questions, so we are almost there, guys. Good job hanging in there. We're at a Catholic school. I almost caught the Holy Ghost with that last answer, Mr. Lord. All right, here you go, Tony.
Oh, thanks. Great job by the crowd. These are quick hitters. These are quick ones, okay? They're not. We filtered out all the spicy questions. So. Real quick, pre-college programs. Definitely kind of a growing part of our community. Students are aware from 9th grade on, these on-campus experiences. Kind of a straightforward question. Do you find them valuable? And in what ways are they valuable for the student?
I do find them valuable. There are a ton. So there are JSI programs that are on a variety of campuses if your student is interested in international affairs. There's Explo if you just want your student to be able to explore and think about what they love. And so what's really helpful when I'm reading is to see how they leverage that to build their application. Like, how did this experience help you understand who you want to be on the other side of these 4 years of this experience? And so that's how I think about it, and I ask about that. If you did pre-college programs, how was it helpful to you? How did it help you explore a new career path, something that you've never done? Some of the programs are built where you pick your major focus, but then you get to have electives. And so I'm looking at your major, but also looking at those electives to understand how you built your summer, those 4 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever it was. Would you do it again? How did it help you explore? Think about, the narrative that you want to build in your application. So they are really helpful for me, especially given that Princeton, how they're approaching testing. It really helps me see, how are you thinking about your path and not what people tell you to take, but what you wanted to take. There is so much independence in those programs, and so it's really helpful for me to see that and how you flag that over the summer.
I think summer programs, pre-college programs are immensely valuable to students. I think many families want to assume that they are somehow tied to admissions. Sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't. So if you're going into them thinking, well, I'm going to do this because it's going to get me into that college, that's not always the case. Most highly selective institutions, there's actually a bit of a separation there between who's running the summer programs, what they do, and what that will even mean to the admissions office. Sometimes it does mean quite a bit to admissions because they could be running the program or they can have engagement opportunities with the students and they can get to know you. It could, but I don't want you to go into them assuming that the goal here is to do the program so I can get into the college. That's not always connected.
Sometimes doing a summer program is an opportunity for the student to kind of weed out what they do and don't want to do. I remember talking to a student after they did an extensive science research program at Yale one summer, and he came back and I said, George, how'd it go? He said, it was a really great experience. And then he said, and now I know I don't want to do research for that. And I was like, that was amazing, right? Saved you years and years of pain and suffering. So, you know, yes, this is about, we're talking about the college admissions process, but these programs can also help the individual kind of develop what they want to do going forward.
You can hang on to a comment. Great, thank you. This is going back to our first section of questions. I think I can answer this competently, but I'll lean on y'all as well. With the financial aid packaging process, the important thing to understand is that there are two primary pathways for financial aid. The essential document is the FAFSA, and the FAFSA is what's been delayed numerous times into the back half of spring. The CSS profile is a far more complex, far more intrusive, far more fair in some ways, financial aid modeling vehicle that typically highly selective institutions are using. There was no delay in the CSS profile. That was released on October 1st. So many highly selective schools are able to at least work with an early package. But the question is, timeline on early decision financial aid. Are schools able to offer projected packages? Are families able to work with kind of an estimated financial aid package?
So most highly selective institutions have too many applicants to give everyone an individualized, like to make your decision on early decision kind of package. But they do give you tools to help you make that decision. So every college is required by law to have a financial aid, it's called a net price calculator on their website. You often find it, just search the school name, net price calculator, you find it. They are built by the institution. You can't fill out one and that be your estimate at all the colleges. There are slight differences. There's the money we get from state and federal funding, but then individual schools have funding as well. So you can't fill out UChicago's and know what Northwestern is going to give you. It's two different number amounts. So if you have a school that someone's thinking ED about and you have to have that financial conversation, you could go on the school's website and fill out the net price calculator. Our financial aid director always says the estimate is as good as the data you put into it. So if your income is fairly steady from year to year, if you know the numbers you're working with, if you put stuff in, it will give you an estimate. You could assume that what you would get in need-based financial aid would be around that number. There's also a website that many national selective institutions use. It's called My Intuition, a far simpler tool, and they do get their data from colleges. It gives you a wider range, but it's easier to use. It's very quick. So there are lots of ways in which you can work on your own estimate and decide. I tell students when they say the letters ED to me, I always say, like, have you sat down to do that calculator? Like, you shouldn't enter into an agreement to go to a school if you can't afford it. And so if you haven't done the calculator, you're not doing that part of the work. So the school won't give you, but they've given you the tools to get that estimate ahead of time.
I just want to take a really quick moment to talk about the institutional priorities that you mentioned. You know, several of the IVs are thinking really thoughtfully about equity and what it means in terms of access to all families to be able to be on campus. And so thinking about schools that are providing 100% scholarship, tuition, I think it's really important. So as a parent, you're going into it and thinking, what are the institutional priorities of this institution, and are they interested in making sure everybody has access? Several of the IVs are doing that work now, and also providing stipends for students, because it isn't just about getting there, it's about, are you able to connect with students, go on trips, because so many of those collaborative moments are just as important as what happens in the classroom. So really thinking thoughtfully about how do we build the experience, not just for the wealthy kids, but for middle-class families, under-resourced families, and so really looking at those institutional priorities become really helpful when you're thinking about access for your family.
Yeah, that's really good.
But to continue that question, it's got to be work though if you're getting into an agreement with a binding college, right? You can't tell me that they're not taking that off the table and starting to work with a financial package. That was my additional question to that. on the financial aid.
Sure.
I mean, if the college, I mean, we could take this offline, but my question is on the financial aid, right? I understand that the financial aid can't be decided, but if the school's gonna come into you and come back to you and say, okay, I'm gonna commit on a contract to you, right? I mean, we could take this offline, but there's gotta be a commitment, an investment, say, okay, my child Samantha's gonna commit to your school, then you gotta start working down that fork in the road to say, okay, let's start working on the financial aid, correct? I mean, you're saying you're getting a bunch of applications, but if I'm in this 100%, does that not happen, or
Go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, if I'm committing,
So, yes.
I mean, I don't want to, I mean, we
But-
could take that offline,
But this is a big part of the choice of whether or not to go
that's
into
what
a
I'm
binding
saying, right?
decision.
I'm gonna commit 95,000 to go to U of M. I don't know how much it is, but it's at least 95,000, right? But go ahead.
So there's three types of families that go to college. There are full pay families. They have it, they can write the check, they can just go, they're not applying for aid, whatever. They can very easily choose to be early decision because financially it's not part of the game. They can hope at the highly selective institutions that do offer merit, because many don't, that they might get some merit, but that's just a bonus. And then on the other end, there are our lowest income families. So these are the students who's, like I loved being a first gen low income student, there's actually a lot of freedom there. My parents were like, you're so smart, it's so great that you love school, you can go anywhere you can afford to go. Like just go, they weren't telling me where to go, and I got to navigate that process and choose, and luckily the school I wanted to go to gave me the most amount of money. Like it all worked out beautifully, there was a lot of choice there. Those students are actually really well served by highly selective institutions, many of whom commit to meeting that family's full need, whatever you need, sometimes without loans, without fees. So our wealthiest families and our lowest income families actually have a great route to highly selective institutions. Our middle income families, the ones who cannot just write the check, but who also have some money or an income and assets to pay toward college, are the ones who are gonna have the roughest road, and the roughest road as it pertains to binding decisions, because they're the families who generally have to do more of the comparisons.
Yes.
U Chicago went loan free several years ago, and we did a lot of data ahead of that, and everything we reviewed was like, oh, this is gonna have the hugest impact on middle income families. It's not low income, it's not full pay. So I would say number one, most families are in that position where we can give some, but we need the college to give some, and we have to find that right number. For many of those families, early decision is not the right choice, because if you can't compare, it's not a financially responsible decision for the family. Now, if your child comes home and they just love the school and they really want to go, you have to do that work of going through the net price calculator, using my intuition if the school uses it, sit down and review everything and decide that a range is either doable or not doable. So I'm first gen, but the kids in my family after me have all gone to college. And I helped two cousins apply to college. And their aunt, she's a nurse, she makes decent money, but it's just her and she's helping them pay. And she was very clear with them about, I have a certain amount that I can pay, and I'm sure there's a certain amount you'd be willing to take out or pay yourself. When they got their offers of admission, their financial aid letters, we printed them out and we laid them out on a table from least expensive to most expensive. And my aunt got first say. I was like, you draw the line where you cannot afford to send them. She's like, these 3 schools are off the list. You can't go there because we can't afford it. Okay, well we have 4 schools left. And of those 4, let's talk about which ones you would make the right decisions financially, but you're most excited about. This is a huge family conversation, and it's most difficult for most of us in that we are in the middle. We're not paying for everything, and we're not getting every dime from the college. If you are in that boat, you're gonna have to work really closely with your counselor, and then also with the colleges that pique your interest. And early decision sometimes is not the route you can go because of that. You can't make a commitment if you don't know that you can pay that cost of what your cost will be by the estimated calculator.
Because you're right, it is $96,000, right?
Right.
And if we're making $300,000, that should be comfortable, but now you have a $96,000 tuition payment.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, sorry about that.
Sure. Kind of dovetailing on that is related to the early decision process. There are some schools, and it comes down to an equity issue at times, right? Oftentimes what ED creates in some spaces is the full pay and the zero pay, right? And it creates it's two lanes of students, and those middle students get squeezed out. There are some more progressive thought schools at the top of the selectivity ladder that are considering removing some of the pressure of ED and putting more of their eggs in the RD basket. My inclination is that that's probably not the majority of schools, where a school like Tulane's going to take, you know, the vast majority of their students in the early decision pool and 1% from the regular decision pool, because to Colin's point, it's, you have those students are, you don't have to continue to recruit those students, right? But what are you hearing from across the industry? Is ED gaining in strength, or are we starting to see schools see the equitable issues in it? What are you hearing about ED? Is it here to stay, or is it on the way out?
I think from colleges, there's only been more interest in ED over the years. You've seen colleges really increase the number of students. They take binding rounds to their schools. It's so advantageous, like we said, to students in schools. It helps them just achieve so many of their goals.
Yeah.
So I don't know that we're going to go away from that, even if we know that it is inequitable for a certain group of families. That's just the reality. I will say at the highly selective set, we're talking about early decision, which is a great route you can go at some schools if you can go that route. But at the most highly selective schools, really what we're talking about is early action. So a single choice or restrictive early action. It's non-binding, but they're asking you, let's not be greedy. Let's not take up spots at all of these highly selective schools. Pick one school of this type of selectivity and apply to that school. And if you get in, you do still have choice. And they do that. They're really smart, these highly selective schools, because there's no yield to take into account there. If you get into some of the Ivies, you're just gonna go to that Ivy. Like, you're super excited, you can't believe you got in. It doesn't matter that you're not bound to them. You're like, of course I'm going there. So there are actually a lot of highly selective schools that will give you a non-binding, still really competitive round. It has some rules, some parameters, they usually have some guidelines. But that's actually really pervasive at the highly selective set. That's just a handful of schools. Outside of that, I think ED is very strong and probably here to stay. If they've given you other options like early action, if they have it, that's great. It's not that you can't get into a highly selective school in regular decision. Many selective schools only have early decision and regular decision, right? That's what I was doing when I was at Kenyon. It was ED or RD. And clearly, we're not taking everyone in early decision. There are plenty of kids worth taking it regular. There are differences here when we're talking about that tiny nuance between the highly selective and everyone else who we call selective, right? The 5% versus the 30%, it's actually very, very different. But I think ED is here to stay, and colleges love it.
Cool. Thanks. I think a nuance to add there is to also understand how schools are funded and how they're using their funding. If a school is tuition-based, which is the large percentage of schools in this country, they're relying on a fairly diverse economic set of applicants to help continue to fill the coffers. If you're at one of those very thin margin schools where year to year your class is determining that next year's budget, you have to be very, very careful with how you're funding and how you're using your funding. And schools that are extremely well endowed, they can meet full need for regardless, and they're not need aware, and they're in a really good position. Last couple of questions I can move quickly. Is there a database for schools that we can find that show demonstrated interest? I don't know that there is, but it's a fair question to ask when you meet your rep. Do you track demonstrated? It's kind of secret, right? Okay. And the last one, sports and admissions. I love this one. You're in luck. We are releasing our NCAA and recruiting webinar today. I recorded it last Friday, so I'll save you that question. We answered that question in our webinar, so you'll get that tomorrow. And I'll let you go through one last thought as we make our way out.
I wish you guys the best of luck. You will be just fine. I can speak, as Veronica mentioned, I did do early action for graduate school. I did have a number of offers where I was able to compare, to tell schools, this school's giving me this much. Can you meet this? Can you match this? So it was really, really helpful being able to go to Princeton and say, I want to leave here with no debt. Harvard, can you do the same? Syracuse, can you do the same? I wanted to leave with no debt. It was very important to me. And so just know that those levers exist for you to be able to do that if you're able to find schools that align and fit with your students' interests.
I know it feels very stressful because today we were talking about a particularly stressful part of the process. But if you're in this room, you're fine. I hate to I don't want to minimize your pain here. But I don't worry about you. You're in a great school with great teachers and counselors. You're looking at, you're already so ahead of the curve. There are students I work with who's not, they're not going to this quality of school. They don't have this kind of help. Their family can't help them. There are students who are really bright and don't have the help that's going to get them there or the privilege that will set them in that position. So I would say, number one, if you're in this room, we're talking details. like we're going somewhere, but we're talking details. So I would say, don't worry that much. It's all gonna be fine. If you're in this room, it's gonna be fine. Also, just a piece of advice for families. It's a stressful situation, especially if your child's gonna be looking at selective institutions. We don't need to add stress to it. Of course, we don't want that for them. I think, what we do in my family, we pick one day a week where we are allowed to talk about college admissions. So you can say, Sunday after dinner, we're gonna sit down, I'm gonna check in with you where you are at with that essay, and hey, we filled out the fact, like we're gonna do our work. We're gonna decide what needs to get done in the next week so that the next week we can check in again. And that's it. Like you really can't make this an everyday part of your life for like months and months and months. It's just gonna be miserable. Just pick your day and time and decide that those are the days that you're gonna talk, you're gonna give yourself homework, and you're gonna both meet in the next week and then talk about it again. I heard this on a panel many years ago from a colleague. They said, the year that your child is applying to college is possibly the last year they ever live with you. And you want the last year that they live with you to be miserable and stressful and horrible. Like, I know that's not what we want. So let's make that last year as wonderful as it can be as we like set them off into the world.
It's not my line.
Veronica's last comment reminded me of one of my good friends. She has 2 daughters. The last one's about to apply to college, and mom posted on Facebook, "Don't have kids, they leave you." What can I add to this? I know that it's hard, and I'm kind of leaning on the parents for this one, but as your child, mentee, relative goes through this process, try to help them maintain perspective through this process. Yes, applying to college is very important, but it's not life or death. I actually remember having a parent call me up after we waitlisted his daughter, and he said to me, "My daughter's gonna die when she gets this decision." And I had to assure the gentleman, "Sir, I'm not a medical doctor, but I'm pretty sure your daughter, as she gets over the initial shock, she's gonna be okay." There are lots and lots of institutions out there, over 4,000, we've got lots to choose from. Lots of different places that will be a great fit. And you know, the idea that you have to go to X college to get into X graduate program to get X job, the reality of the situation is that's not necessarily the case. If you are a superstar, then you're going to shine no matter where you end up. And I encourage the students to take that approach to this process. You are the superstar, and if University of Chicago or Princeton don't want you, then that's their loss. Right? I wish you all the very best of luck in this process.
Everybody take a big deep breath now. Yes, okay. I hope that you all found that very helpful. We have the best college counseling team in the business. Should we give them a round of applause?